Right, after that rapid fire opening, we're going to get into some topics, politics and news from around the world before we get into the deeper exposés later in the show. So, in a normal election year, in any given state, hundreds or even thousands of absentee ballots get tossed for everything from late postmarks to open envelopes. Now, North Carolina rejected 546 ballots for missing witness signatures, which is probably why Utah sent 13 out where you didn't have a box to sign in. And that was in the 2012 presidential race. Virginia, no surprise, tossed 216 ballots in the 2018 midterms because they arrived in an unofficial envelope. Arizona discarded 1,516 ballots for non-matching signatures the same year. The 2020 presidential election will not be normal. I guess that it should have been cancelled a long time ago. Absentee ballot rejections this November are projected to reach historic levels, risking widespread disenfranchisement of the minority voters and the credibility of election results. This is according to a journalism investigation and a PBS series Frontline investigation. Now, at least 1.03 million absentee ballots could be tossed if half of the nation votes by mail. Discarded votes jump to 1.55 million if 75% of the country votes absentee. Now, in the latter scenario, more than 185,000 votes could be lost in Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, states considered key to capturing the White House. And these numbers were said to be conservative and based on 2016 rejection rates when fewer voters submitted absentee ballots. Now, a record number of voters will be voting absentee for the first time in 2020, and voters new to vote by mail are at great risk of making mistakes. The first one is the result is on the outside of the envelope. Oh dear. And if errors push the rejection rate up to just 2%, about 2.15 million votes would be cast aside, which is roughly the population of New Mexico. Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania rejected about 60,000 votes in primaries earlier this year, according to the Amherst College law professor Lawrence Douglas, and only a few thousand votes shy of Trump's margin of victory in those states in 2016. And he said a result like this in November could cast doubt on who actually carried the key swing states, with the overall election hanging in the balance. And he added that such an outcome could trigger a chaotic welter of lawsuits and clashing conspiracy theories, all designed to keep the Milgram people distracted, in my opinion. The House non-speaker, Nancy Pelosi, decided to become a bit unhinged this week, to much hilarity, when the Clinton News Network host, Wolf Blitzer, pressed her on why she hadn't agreed to a compromise fake COVID-19 relief bill, and going so far as to call the network apologists for the Republican position. Now, on Tuesday, the outburst, which provided much comic relief for critics of CNN's anti-Trump and anti-conservative bias, came as Blitzer grilled Pelosi, which someone would, on why she hasn't come to agreement with Republicans on economic relief legislation after the Trump administration offered a $1.8 trillion package. Now, the interview went off the rails as Blitzer pointed out that some House Democrats wanted to accept the proposal, citing a tweet by Democrat Representative Ro Khanna, saying the offer was more than double that Barack Obama economic stimulus program in 2009. And Kahana said the people in need cannot wait until February, referencing when relief checks might go out if the issue is tabled until after the November the 3rd election. So it said people in need can't wait till February. 1.8 is significant and more than twice the Obama stimulus, and it will allow Biden to start with infrastructure. Now, Obama won in 2008 by doing the right thing on top instead of what was expedient, making a deal and put the ball in McConnell's court, according to Kahana. But Blitzer persisted, pointing out that millions of Americans have lost their jobs and can't pay their rent or buy food for their families. He said, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, and cited a conversation with former Democrat presidential candidate Andrew Yang, who also favours compromise. And Pelosi then lost it. Honest to God, I can't get over it. Andrew Yang, he's lovely. Ro Kahana, he's lovely. That wasn't a question, Pelosi, you idiot. They're not negotiating this situation. They have no idea of the particulars. And she then told Blitzer that you really don't know what you're talking about, and said he needs to show some level of respect to the people who have worked on the legislation. Well, so-called politicians are pretending to be acting as caring for the American people, spouting utter crap, and hold the people to hostage for votes. The carnage of America will continue to rot. Republican and Democrat has not worked for America. And at which point do the masses not see through that? Politics is theatre and illusion for the absurd. BlackRock, Black Sun, Black Eagle, Black Star Trust, all the same group. Made the headlines again this week with BlackRock nabs $460 million in EFT, which is a transfer, as Mexico goes green. The Mexican pension funds are funneling money towards a new socially responsible ETF and demanding local companies offer more data on how they are handling the environment, social and governance issues. BlackRock Inc. shares ESG MSI Mexico ETF has seen more than 460 million inflows since its launch at the end of July, according to data compiled by Bloomberg. Now, during the same period, investors dumped about 350 million of the iShares that had been favoured by local pensions, or Afores, to bet on the benchmark Mexpol index. One has to ask the question, is this the Mexico money the trustee sent? We would welcome some clarity, please. More financial troubles, this time in China. China's government is expected to price a potential $6 billion bond sale this week ahead of possible volatility from the US elections next month. The Ministry of Finance is arranging investors' calls for a 144A and Regulation S senior bonds on Tuesday, and according to people familiar with the matter who aren't authorised to speak publicly. And the ministry is seeking to raise about $6 billion via multi-tranche notes that will likely include 3, 5-year, 10-year and 30-year maturities. And officials at the ministry weren't available to comment. Now, the planned bond sale follows the ministry's jumbo global debt offerings in 2 currencies in November, when it sold $6 billion of bonds and $4 billion in euro notes, and the former drew bumper demand with orders at more than triple the targeted size. Now, China's fresh sovereign debt sale this week comes as uncertainty ahead of the elections is beginning to weigh on investment or investor sentiment, with some analysts anticipating a pickup in volatility. I guess they're expecting a massive slide in America and Europe's currencies based on a stupid election that should have been cancelled months ago. But with this news, it suggests harsh financial times ahead, I suspect. Remember the story of the clown of Israel, Netanyahu, and his UN address recently, where he was pointing out another region in Beirut. And then, lo and behold, this week, a fuel tank has exploded in a densely populated area of the Lebanese capital, Beirut, killing at least 4 people and injuring 20. It's likely to be more. And the blast occurred after the tank caught fire in Tariq al-Jadid district, and TV footage showed flames leaping up buildings in the area's narrow streets. There is no word on the cause of the fire, and rescue efforts were ongoing. Now, the blast caused panic in the city, scarred by the explosion that killed 203 people in the port area in August. And the latest fire and explosion also comes amid a severe financial crisis due to the fake virus pandemic, which have fueled widespread discontent. Now, on Friday, firefighters used ladders to scale the outside of apartment buildings to rescue residents from their balconies. And there was much panic in Beirut again. Another of Netanyahu's prophecies comes to fruition. Is he Esther as well? Israel and the people of Israel, which you won't hear on CNN or the BBC for that matter, or Sky for that matter. The people of Israel have flocked to the streets to decry the government's ban on mass demonstrations, which they see as a distraction from the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's corruption trial. And the rather noisy gathering ended up in scuffles with the police. Now, according to the reports, the crowd, numbering hundreds, it was actually thousands, amassed in Tel Aviv when night fell on Tuesday, carrying homemade placards that demanded the resignation of Netanyahu. Others were seen waving flags and chanting slogans in unison. And at some point, the demonstration became chaotic, although police began to get things under control. Officers, some armed, some wearing riot gear, didn't deploy any crowd control measures but used their hands to push protesters away. Not exactly what I was told. They weren't. And demonstrators flocked to the streets in defiance of new measures passed last week, which prohibit Israelis from travelling more than a kilometre from where they live to protest, and limit rallies to a social distance group of just 20 people. The irony of the alleged victims of fascism carrying it out on their own populace will not be lost on our listeners. And we're still with the clowns of Israel on the latest attempt to harvest countries and take over their rule. This time Sudan, which is in fairly desperate straits at the moment, a collapsing economy, hyperinflation looming, and a nationwide food crisis. And the administration of US President Donald Trump and the Israeli government have now seen an opportunity, a bit like what happened to the United Arab Emirates. The country's democratic hopes hang by a thread 18 months after a non-violent protest overthrew their long-term ruler Omar al-Bashir. But if Sudan recognises Israel, then the US will strike it off the state sponsors of terrorists. Really? If Sudan recognizes Israel, then the US will strike it off the state sponsors of terrorists. Opening the door, it says, to essential economic stabilization measures. I would call that bribe. There you go. Now, after seizing power in a military coup in 1989, President Bashir turned Khartoum, it said, into a global centre for militant jihadism. And if you believe that, you'll believe anything. Al-Qaeda and other extremist groups, which are all run by the CIA, used Sudan as the base for carrying out terror attacks in the US, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Ethiopia, Uganda, Kenya, and elsewhere. But after the first terror attack on New York's World Trade Center in 1993, the US designated Sudan as a state sponsor of terrorism. Sudan, really? You'll have a laugh. International financial sanctions and military pressure from neighbouring countries which supported Sudanese rebels pushed Sudan to expel Osama bin Laden, who was actually in Afghanistan, not Sudan, and other jihadists 3 years later. Now, shortly after the September 11, 2001 attacks, Sudan's security services became a valued partner with the CIA. And on that basis, Sudan should have been removed from the state sponsors list of terror. And the Bashir government still operated in the shadows. It kept open its links, they say, to Iran and Hamas, who are run by Israel, just saying. And on at least 2 occasions, Israeli fighter planes attacked convoys travelling up Sudan's Red Sea coast, allegedly taking arms to Hamas. Now, in 2016, under pressure from Saudi Arabia, which is another Israeli puppet, and the United Arab Emirates, which is the latest Israeli puppet, the Bashir government cut its ties with Iran. Yet, after the democratic revolution last year, Washington, D.C. was slow to shift. And the problem was that keeping sanctions on Sudan could easily become a self-fulfilling prophecy, condemning the country to state failure. And as long as Sudan stays blacklisted, crippling financial sanctions stay in place, and the legitimate Sudanese businesses are handicapped, foreign direct investment is shackled, and the IMF and World Bank cannot adopt a package to relieve its massive debt, which is 72 billion and counting. The 72 billion and counting is because of the IMF and World Bank. That's what they do to countries. But now, the 3-day saviour man is offering Sudan a way out. Visiting Khartoum at the end of August, Secretary of Deep State Mike Pompeo proposed a deal to Sudan's civil Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok that if Sudan recognised Israel, President Trump would circumvent the congressional bloc. Are we here to make America great again or Israel great? They've never been, I'm not saying again, because they've never been great for anybody. Why is all the diplomatic meetings going on with United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and now Sudan, all for the benefit of Israel? And yes, that is a common sense question. Now, following the United Arab Emirates decision last month, Sudan, a member of the Arab League, would only be the 5th Arab state to do so. And the point is, the caliphate that I warned of back in 2013 is now taking shape. You decide. But look at the map. Only Iran is the barrier to India, it seems. And yet again, this is involving the CIA and more skullduggery. President Truman, it was, who set up the CIA. And he was asked by Merle Miller, Mr. President, I know that you were responsible as the president for setting up the CIA. How do you feel about it now? And Truman said, I think it was a mistake. And if I'd known what was going to happen, I would never have done it. Hear, hear.